Hello everyone. Today I want to talk to you about how, after the US imposed additional tariffs on China, American small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, have become dependent on China and have written letters to Trump expressing their grievances. Also, Trump's administration is aggressively pursuing its ambitions in Europe, but as the EU's major powers' economies rapidly decline, he's still fantasizing about joining forces with Japan and Indonesia to contain China, hoping to boost his own popularity through this. While the Trump administration is smug about the extra revenue from tariffs, it's actually the American SMEs who are bearing the brunt and are crying out in pain, according to the New York Times on August 21st. According to the report, Trump's tariffs have forced American businesses into survival mode. The first case we'll mention is that of 78-year-old Richard May. After the war ended, Richard returned to the US and went to business school for further studies. One of the economics courses he took left a deep impression on him. He learned about the renowned economist David Ricardo, who, in the 19th century, proposed the theory of comparative advantage among different countries. A country should focus on the areas it excels at most and obtain the goods it needs from other countries through trade. In 1990, he started a business in the United States, founding a company called MFG Direct USA, which designs medical care equipment and garage doors. As a practical application of Ricardo's theory, he would send his design blueprints to manufacturers in Asia to have the products made. Over the next 35 years, this model allowed his company to develop steadily. But this year, with President Trump, because of the impact of tariffs, he's worried that his company won't be able to hold on for another 60 days. Now, the garage doors he imports from China have to pay an 83% tariff to the US government, which includes 4 different types of new and old tariffs. For 78-year-old Richard May, this is a big deal. Originally, he relied on the company for stable income and never imagined that at his age, he would have to switch into survival mode. He's made massive layoffs and cut expenses, and his team works 12 hours a day, desperately searching for new clients who can bear higher product prices. Although he managed to survive the initial impact, he fears he won't be able to hold on in the future. He says, "Right now, we're barely hanging on. Everyone is giving it their all just to keep the company alive." Here's another case. At 38 years old, Holly Eve is starting to face reality. She may have to shut down her all-natural deodorant and shampoo company, Metamilimi, which she founded in California. 9 years ago, she started the business because she couldn't find effective natural deodorant products, so she began making them in her own kitchen. Later, she relied on American contract manufacturers to produce her products. But now, these manufacturers have told her that they depend on foreign suppliers for raw materials, and the manufacturing costs are now increased by 200%. During the pandemic, her company was still growing rapidly, with online shopping demand driving up sales. When inventory ran out, she applied for a small business loan to expand operations. However, as online advertising became more and more expensive and less effective, the company started to hit a downturn. By the beginning of this year, she was still optimistic about the future, but the impact of tariffs left her completely disheartened. Her American contract manufacturer told her that since all the raw materials come from abroad, they had to raise their processing fees by anywhere from 60% to 200%. In addition, tariffs on the cardboard boxes and other packaging she imports have also risen sharply. She said it's now difficult for her to repay her loans, and the problem is so big that there's no way to solve it. It has completely destroyed her mental health. Her sense of self-worth was entirely tied to this company, which had supported her through the pain of divorce and a serious car accident. Now the company is on the verge of bankruptcy. It was almost unbearable for her, but she said her family's support brought her some comfort. Her father, Stephen Lanfield, asked people to vote for Trump, and he wrote on behalf of his daughter, believing that if Trump understood, he would realize that his daughter's company really couldn't survive under these tariffs. In his letter, her father said that small businesses are the backbone of America, and that high tariff policies are unfair to them. Many businesses simply have no choice but to shut down. He pleaded for a reconsideration of these tariff policies, especially for people like his daughter. Entrepreneurs and small business owners should be able to continue contributing to the American economy instead of being crushed by costs that are beyond their control. Just over 6 months after Trump quickly launched a global trade war, some American small businesses are already on the brink of bankruptcy, and some have simply chosen to give up. Recently, China and the US agreed to extend the deadline for suspending tariff increases by 90 days, avoiding another hike in tariffs on Chinese goods. This move, which prevents an additional 5% tariff on $140 billion worth of goods, has averted the worst-case scenario of a complete economic decoupling between the two major economies. However, for many American small and medium-sized enterprises that still have to pay existing tariffs, this is little relief. For example, Chinese goods are still subject to at least a 30% tariff, while imported products from other countries face a 50% import tax. The suspension of tariff increases doesn't offer them much help. According to data from the University Budget Laboratory, the average actual tariff rate in the United States has soared from 2.5% in January 2017, when Trump took office, to 18.6% in early August, reaching a new high in over 90 years. Many companies stockpiled large amounts of key raw materials and components before the tariff hikes, but as inventories are gradually depleted, the full impact of the tariffs is starting to show, delivering a fatal blow to American companies struggling to survive. To sum up, the first point revealed by the Times is a reality. Many American companies rely on Chinese manufacturing or Chinese component supplies and have not yet imposed at least a 30% tariff on Chinese goods. If it's steel, your products have to pay a 50% tariff, causing their costs to skyrocket, which is simply unbearable. If they are forced to significantly raise product prices, it will scare off consumers, and as a result, many small and medium-sized enterprises are forced to close down after running out of inventory. Secondly, Trump's reason for raising tariffs is to force industries to return and increase employment in the US. But the effect is just the opposite. I think companies can't handle it, leading to layoffs or even bankruptcy. The US employment figures in the manufacturing sector already reflect this. The increase in non-farm payrolls is far below expectations and has only gone up slightly. 73,000 people, and they even had to revise down the previously announced provisional figures for May and June. The combined employment numbers for those 2 months were drastically reduced by a total of 258,000 compared to earlier reports. This decline shows that the US economy is deteriorating. The only good news is that the chances of a US interest rate cut have greatly increased. Thirdly, the US is highly dependent on China's supply chain, and on top of that, the US has also imposed tariffs of over 19% on other manufacturing countries. American companies simply can't find alternative products to replace them. So when Trump sharply increased tariffs, it was Americans themselves who had to bear the cost. Additionally, I want to talk about former European Central Bank President Mario Draghi's warning to the EU. On August 22nd, Draghi gave a speech where he said that the EU failed to play a significant role in this year's major geopolitical conflicts and even succumbed to tariff pressure from its ally, the United States. Does this mean the EU's fantasy of being a global powerhouse has already been shattered? He said that in the new round of the Israel-Palestine conflict, as well as the conflict between Iran and Israel in June this year, the EU has only played the role of a bystander. The EU has provided substantial aid to Ukraine, but in the process of promoting peace talks for Ukraine, the EU has only played a relatively marginal role. He also said, "We have had no choice but to yield to the United States." This largest trading partner and long-term ally has imposed additional tariff pressure on the EU. We have been pressured by the US to increase military spending. Perhaps we would have decided to increase military spending anyway, but under such intense pressure from the US, the way we increase it might not be the same. Representing Europe's interests, but he said that a series of events in 2025 revealed a harsh reality. The EU can no longer fantasize about being a global giant, nor can it continue to believe that economic strength alone can bring global influence. For years, the EU believed that its economic scale, with 450 million consumers, gave it geopolitical and international trade influence. But this year will be marked as the year when that illusion disappears, the belief that economic power alone can guarantee geopolitical strength. These ideas are wrong, so it's no surprise that doubts about the EU have reached new heights. But now, one can't help but sigh. The EU, under pressure, has been forced to sign a humiliating agreement. According to the so-called Comfort Agreement, the EU has to remove all tariffs on American industrial goods and provide preferential market access for American seafood and agricultural products. However, EU products exported to the US will still face a unilateral 15% tariff. On top of that, the EU must also agree to purchase at least $750 billion worth of energy products from the US within 3 years. $40 billion worth of American AI chips will be used in European data centers, and European companies will make an additional $600 billion in investments in strategic sectors in the US. Just a year ago, Thierry Breton, commissioned by the EU, wrote a report aimed at enhancing Europe's competitiveness. There were many recommendations, and one key point was joint EU financing. However, while he proposed investing 750 to 800 billion euros in Europe to boost the European economy, Europe's own investments have yet to show results. Now, with the signing of the new Nanjing Treaty, they're actually going to invest 600 billion in the US to revitalize the American economy. This is truly ironic. What's even more ironic is that the EU's major power, Germany, still seems to be dreaming of leading the world, as if it hasn't woken up yet. Germany's so-called civilized silence, since taking office as chancellor in May this year, the government has no large-scale economic reform plans. At the same time, it is currently busy with crisis management in foreign policy, trying to maintain good relations with Trump helping Ukraine fight against Russia, and secretly supporting Israel. The international community calls this shopping diplomacy, and the Chancellor seems to enjoy it immensely. Recently, Annalena Baerbock, who, like the Chancellor, is from the Greens and serves as Germany's foreign minister, embarked on her first trip to Asia since taking office, visiting Japan and Indonesia. For several consecutive days, she criticized China for threatening Asian security, claiming that Germany is committed to establishing a rules-based international order that is binding for everyone, which is clearly aimed at China. However, Japan and Indonesia have responded coolly to Germany's suggestion of joining forces to expand. Facing US tariffs, both Japan and Indonesia are actually looking to improve economic relations with China, thinking, what makes you qualified to lead this anti-China expansion? They don't want to get involved in these muddy waters, but Germany's great power ambitions have run into economic headwinds. Since taking office, and with the second quarter economic data just released, not only was there no growth, the contraction was much greater than previously expected. On August 22nd, the Federal Statistical Office revised its earlier estimate, showing that Germany's GDP from April to June fell by 0.3% compared to the previous month, whereas the initial estimate was only a 0.1% decline, so the reality was 0.2 percentage points worse. The reason for this revision was mainly that industrial output performed worse than initially expected. In the first quarter, the economy still managed to grow by 0.3%, but in the latest quarter, apart from the construction and energy sectors, other industries declined by 2.8%. Several sectors saw significant declines, especially machinery and equipment manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, and the food industry. As a major export nation, Germany's current export situation is worsening. According to data from the Federal Statistical Office, in the first half of this year, Germany's export value was 786 billion euros, a decrease of 0.1% compared to last year. However, the total value of imported goods increased by 4.4% over the same period. As a result, the trade surplus dropped from 133.7 billion euros to 104 billion euros. Exports to the United States in particular fell sharply, dropping by 3 points. The United States remains the most important buyer of German products, but Germany's exports of automobiles and auto parts to the US fell by 8.6%, and exports of machinery and equipment dropped by 7.9%. According to Grint, the chief economist of the Mechanical Engineering Industry Association, this news is shocking. However, the growth and recovery at the beginning of the year was only a temporary rebound, and the sharp decline in exports is the result of tariffs hindering trade. The economy is not doing well, and the public's evaluation of the administration after 100 days in office is extremely poor. A recent poll was released. Astonishingly, the poll shows that Merz's approval rating after 100 days in office is far lower than that of his two predecessors. Merz's current approval rating is only 32%. For comparison, former Chancellor from the Social Democratic Party Scholz had an approval rating of 56% after 100 days, and the previous CDU Chancellor Merkel had an even higher rating of 74%. Merz's support is even lower than Trump's 39% after 100 days in office. The conclusion is that Merz's government is still indulging in grand ambitions despite the economic downturn. The rhetoric of confronting China, experts warn that there is currently no way to effectively curb illegal immigration or revive the economy in the short term. As a result, the government is focusing on foreign affairs and propaganda in hopes of boosting public approval. However, this could be an even bigger trap, and Merz is very likely to face the tragic fate of being forced out of office early.